Today's topic is casts of honeybees and their jobs. That's what we're going to cover today. A caste is a subset of individuals within a colony or society of insects that has specific jobs and tasks based on their anatomy or their morphological differences. That's the fancy definition. And so in North American honeybees, we have 3 different castes that perform a multitude of tasks, but they're separated into 3 subsets. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, castes of honeybees. So welcome to the live stream. If you've seen one of my streams before, I'm Doug the Bee Guy. Hello, Charlie. And if you've gotten some value out of my streams, please like, and that helps YouTube tell other beekeepers that this is important to look at. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that. We're hoping to get more beekeepers subscribing so that you'll have better success with your bees. And don't forget to click on the bell notification icon. That will help you get notified whenever I put something up that's of interest to you. So the castes of the honeybees that we're going to be covering today are the drones, the workers, and the queen. So those are the 3 main subsets in honeybees. We're going to talk about each one, talk about their special things that they do, and hopefully this will just help you understand more about how honeybees interact with each other and how the whole society works, because most people nowadays probably know, but in the old days they didn't really know that honeybees are considered a super organism. One honeybee cannot survive by itself outside of the hive, so they have to be in a community, and that's why it's called a colony. So they have to be in a large group, and each person or bee has a different task, and they kind of communicate, and that's what this whole caste thing is all about. So let's get started with the drone. The drone is the largest bee in the hive. It emerges in 24 days. So from the time its egg is laid to the time it emerges, it's 24 days. It's the longest period that it takes a bee to hatch. Lifespan is from 8 to 9 weeks, depending on what documentation you read. Some people say 90 days. Hello, Caleb. And so it's, it varies. This stuff is not set in stone. From every place that I looked for information, everybody had a different. So I'm just kind of giving you a general information. The eyes are twice the size of worker bee eyes. And the reason is because that drone needs to be able to see the queen to mate with her from long distances. And so he has amazing large eyes. And that is definitely the main thing about drones. Their cells are larger. If you look at a comb of bees when they're hatching, the little drone cells stick above the normal cells, because they are just larger, and they're a large bee. The drones become fertile. They are male, and they become fertile 8 days after they're hatched. So it does take them a while. They stay in the hive for a day or two, let their wings harden, then they go out for an orientation flight, and then they start going to the drone congregation area, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about queen mating and stuff like that. So that's kind of the first part of the drone information. The rest of the information is pretty interesting. The drone has no stinger, so you can actually grab a drone, squeeze him, and it's not going to sting you. There's a lot of videos out there about people putting bees in their mouth, and that's usually what they do is they take a drone and put it in their mouth, and everybody's amazed that they don't get stung because they don't understand that the drone doesn't have a stinger. So that's a cool trick. You probably won't see me doing that, so don't hold your breath. They do not have a pollen basket for carrying pollen on their legs, and they do not have any glands to perform tasks or work in the hive. Their sole purpose for existence is to fertilize queens. And it's not their queen that they're trying to fertilize. Most people don't understand that this really is all about propagating the genetics of that colony to the next generation. So their fertilization has nothing to do with the queen that is laying, which is their mother. Their whole thing is to move the genetic DNA further out and go and mate with another queen from another hive and perpetuate that DNA. So that's their sole purpose. Um, let's see, with some other information, mating takes place in about 3 seconds. The mating does kill the bee. Um, they mate with the queen. It kind of blows their lower abdomen off, and they die and they fall to the ground. And so it's not a great life, but they don't have to work. They just hang out. They do not. They do not. Um, let's see if I can switch back to this so I'm not talking to a blank screen. They do not, lost my train of thought. They do not have the ability to feed themselves protein. They can eat honey if nobody will feed them, but they're more like a queen. They really need to be fed, and they can't feed themselves protein, so they have to be fed. They're almost like a sumo wrestler, if you know anything about the sumo wrestlers. They're cared for, they're dressed, they're fed these amazing meals, because a lot of that they can't do for themselves because they become so large. And so that's kind of what the drone is. They're serviced by the workers, and their main job is to go out and propagate the genetic diversity and move along their DNA. And so that's kind of what they do. As far as how many drones are in the hive, again, the number varies. Everybody has a different view, but it's usually less than 10% of the hive is drones. 600 to a few thousand. And they do throw them out in the wintertime because since they don't do any work and they just eat and take up resources, um, the worker bees get rid of them in the fall. So that's one sign to look for when you're taking care of your hive and you say, well, is fall coming? Obviously you check the weather, but if you live in an area where the weather doesn't change that much, and you're looking for changes in bees, one of the things you can look at is when the drones start getting kicked out. They start looking a little frail. Maybe sometimes they get their wings ripped off and they get thrown out the front entrance. And so that's kind of a sign that the hive is shutting down for the season. The queen's going to stop laying, or it's going to slow way down, and things are changing. And so that's a good indication of that. And that's kind of why we're doing this whole thing about the different casts, because there's a lot of indications as a beekeeper that are important, and if you know what to look for, it just helps you. We're not doing this as a biologist with all this fancy terms and everything, because I'm not a biologist, I'm a beekeeper. But this information is important. So let's move on to the worker bee. The worker bee emerges in 21 days from the time its egg is laid to the time it hatches. There's 2 different lifespans for the worker bees because they perform different tasks. So the summer lifespan is considered to be 30 to 45 days. Could be shorter, could be longer in different parts of the world. Their winter lifespan is from 4 to 6 months, depending on how long your winter is. They do live a long time in the winter, and most people will look at that and go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why do they live so much longer? Well, the scientists tell us because they don't fly around, they don't do any massive amounts of work. In the wintertime, their main goal is to create heat for the queen and the cluster, and they eat honey and they flex their wing muscles to create heat. So they're really not doing the massive amount of work that they do in the summertime, and that's why they can live so much longer. There's actually quite a few studies, if you go searching, that the winter bees are actually different than the summer worker bees. At some point in the late summer, early fall, the eggs are the same. Everything's the same. They don't really know what the difference is, but they start getting these more of the hyperpharyngeal gland. I can't even pronounce that, but that's the fat gland that produces the royal jelly. But the winter bees have more of that around their forehead, and they start storing fat. And they store that fat so that they can feed it to the spring bees. And if you are a beekeeper or you want to become a beekeeper, one thing to know about the winter worker bees is that their sting is much more potent than a summer bee or an early spring bee. So if you're working in your hive in the spring and you happen not to have gloves or whatever, you're not working with your veil because you don't think, and you get stung, it stings a little bit, and it hurts, but it's not nearly the sting of a fall bee because they have to protect their honey, they have to protect their hive from animals and things, and so it's a totally different sting. You would not believe the difference, and hopefully you won't experience that, but if you do, you'll understand the difference. There is definitely a difference in the bee. You can't see it by looking at them, and like I said, there's no difference as far as the way they develop. But they're still studying it. There's still a lot of stuff we don't know about the honeybees. And the other thing that the worker bee has is the wax glands. If you look at a dead bee in the spring, you can sometimes even still see the little wax platelets. There's little kind of like shields or little pieces of armor on their underbelly, and these little wax platelets come out from their underbelly, and that's what they use. They take a little wax chip basically, and they move it with their mandibles and their mouth, and they form it into honeycomb. And that's kind of how the honeycomb gets made. It's something that they produce, and they have the glands to do that. And that's why the worker bees are important. All right, so worker bees do have a stinger on the end of their abdomen. So don't put the worker bee in your mouth and show off to your friends, because it'll probably sting you in the mouth or the tongue or something. The interesting thing about a worker bee is that their tasks change based on the age that they are. So we know that the colony of bees is a superorganism, and they all do all kinds of different jobs, and here is how they get them all done. It's because somehow genetically in their code they know by how old they are what they should be doing. It's pre-programmed. So from 0 to 2 days, they're cleaning the cell that they came out of, polishing it, helping the bee next to them polish and clean the cell. They're walking around the hive looking for different things to do as far as cleaning and making the cells pretty. So that's what they do for the first 2 days. They also, their wings harden. They get a little bit more, their hair dries off. If you've ever seen young bees hatch out, or if you're going to start beekeeping this year, or in the next few years, you'll see that they're kind of white. They're whitish, and their hair is not quite as stand up, almost like a chicken. If you've ever seen a little baby chicken hatch, they're all wet and everything's matted, and then just a few hours later, everything's dry and it's all fuzzy. Same thing with the bee. They have like a whitish color, and their wings harden and dry up, and everything changes just in the first few hours. So that's what they do in the first 2 days. From 3 to 10 days is one of the most important jobs. It's called the nurse bees, and that's when they go around the queen and groom her and clean her and feed her, and that's also when they produce royal jelly, which is one of the foods that the whole hive needs to survive. And so the queen eats nothing but royal jelly, and as long as there's nurse bees to feed her, she will eat honey if she's starving by herself, but typically she only eats royal jelly. And those young nurse bees are the bees that provide it, between 3 and 10 days old. So here is an interesting thing. This is why that sometimes when you buy a package of bees and you put it in and everything's going good and you think it's going to be fine, and then you go back a few weeks later and they killed the queen and they're making a new queen. The reason is that when you get a package, let's say you get it in the mail, they put it in there. Usually they send it out the same day or maybe 1 day late, but they're usually pretty fast. But let's say it takes 4 or 5 days in the mail. You let the queen out. She takes 4 or 5 days to get out, and then maybe she lays that same day. But maybe she takes 1 or 2 days to get oriented, to get fed, to fatten up her abdomen. Because, when the queen stops laying, she shuts down, and it takes her a little while to get going again. We'll talk about that when we talk about queens. But anyway, so let's add up those days. They put the bees in there. They mailed it, so that's 2 days. It took 2 or 3 or 4 days to get you. That's 6 days. and it took 4 days or 5 days for her to start laying. That's 11 days. What's happened? All the nurse bees are too old now. And so there's a lot less royal jelly coming out of them. And that sends a signal to the colony or the society that something is wrong. And sometimes that signal is strong enough so that they let the queen start laying, they let her get going, and then they kill her. And then they take one of those eggs and turn it into a queen because they think something is wrong because of that delay. Because in a normal beehive colony, there is always nurse bees. There's always new bees being born that are 3 to 10 days old. And, 0 to 2 days, 3 to 10 days. So that is a problem. So if you just buying 1 or 2 packages, you don't always see it. But like when I do it, sometimes 30, 40, 50 packages, you will see that happen. And what the best way to prevent that from happening is to take a frame of brood from another hive and put that in there. And so that what happens is those nurse bees are always going to be there because that frame of brood starts hatching. And then you're always going to have those bees that are 3 to 10 days old. And that's one of the foolproof ways to prevent that supersedure, that early supersedure from happening. And it's not that the bees that are older can't produce a little bit of royal jelly. They can, because obviously packages survive all the time and there's that delay is still there. They can, it's just that they don't want to, and they're not programmed to, and their glands are starting to shrink down and they're not as efficient at doing that job. So it's not that they can't, it's just that they're not programmed to do it. Once they pass the 10-day threshold, they're told to do something else. Just like, when you go to school, when you're in 8th grade, then you graduate and you know that you're going to high school, right? So it's the same thing. It's like there's a pre-programmed thing in their DNA that tells them what they should be doing. All right, so that's the 3 to 10 day nurse bee stage, which is very important. The next stage, also very important, is the 11 to 20 day stage, which is the food storage stage. And the food storage stage has a million different jobs in it. We're talking about comb building, food storage, the undertakers, which take out all the dead bees. The bees keep the hive very clean. They patrol for work. This is when they look for different jobs in that 11 to 20 days because they change and they just do whatever job is most important at the time. They groom the queen. They groom each other. They have hygienic behavior. Some bees will clean things out. Maybe they'll grab the mites, and some bees do that more than others. And then, of course, they do hive ventilation, which is very important. They regulate that temperature to keep that brood nest a consistent temperature so that the brood can be laid, the eggs can be laid, they can be fed, and they can hatch, and they have a very consistent temperature. So sometimes in the summertime, you'll see a million bees on the outside, and that's because it's very hot in there with all those new bodies inside there. And they come out. If you go up to the hive, they'll be fanning it. You'll smell the smell of the heat coming out of it. And that's what they're doing. They're regulating the temperature of the hive. And then after 21 days, they become foragers. So from 21 days till the time they die, they just forage. But they forage for not just nectar, they forage for pollen, for water, for propolis, and nectar. So some of the stuff that I read, scientists say that they do one job the rest of their life. There's proof that once they become a water bee, that's what they do. They just bring water to the hive until they die. I'm not a bee scientist, so I can't tell you, but that's what they say. They pick a job, and that's what they do until they die. Why they wouldn't change and do what's more important at a certain time, I don't know. That makes more sense to me, but again, I'm just telling you what I read. So from 21 days to death, they forage for all the stuff that they need to bring into the hive. One study I read from Tennessee scientists said that after they fly 500 miles is when their wings are shredded, and you'll see the bees and they come out at night when they die. If you've ever watched a hive, or if you, like I said, if you're going to get some bees, you'll start to see these things. If you go out to your hive in the evening, kind of at dusk, what starts to happen is the tired bees, they come out and they fly out, and they'll just barely come out. They're so tired, their wings are frazzled, and they come out somewhere close to the hive and they die because they don't want to die inside the hive. They can sense that they're going to die, and they don't want to stress the hive by putting a bunch of dead bees in the hive. There obviously some still do die in the hive. That's why you see the bees carrying the dead bees out, the undertakers. That really happens more in the fall and the winter when it's too cold to come out. In the summertime, you will see a lot of bees coming out in the evening. They'll land on a piece of grass or a flower or something, and then they just die. And that's the way it works. So they're saying after 500 miles is kind of what happens to the workers. So there is the worker information as far as what we know. Obviously, like I said, we don't know everything. You know, the bees do all kinds of stuff that I'm sure we're not aware of. They communicate via pheromones and their antenna and all kinds of things. But that's the information that we know, and that's what the workers do um, based on information that I found out. All right, let's move on to the queen. Queen is the largest bee in the hive. She can be up to 2 centimeters long. But look at her emerging days. Emerging virgins hatch in 16 days. Isn't that amazing? She's the largest bee in the hive, but yet she has the smallest gestation period. I always find that just fascinating, that such a large bee can be made in such a short amount of time. And the reason is that the queen is fed royal jelly for 9 days in a row, whereas the worker bees are fed royal jelly for 3 days, and then their diet is changed. And so they develop differently. And there's several different theories about, is it what's in the royal jelly, or is it another signal that changes the queen? But basically, the workers are born and they don't have ovaries, and the queen is born with ovaries and everything intact so that she can be fertilized. And the difference is really just the amount of royal jelly that she is fed. And obviously, the design of the super colony by God was that this queen is very important, and if she dies, the whole colony dies. So she needs to be the one who is born the fastest. And it's obvious if you look at that, like you're going to make a new queen in 16 days. Now, if it took 24 or 28 like a drone, that would have serious effect on the hive. So it's pretty amazing to me. Her lifespan can be 3 to 5 years. Typically, as a beekeeper, you will requeen your hives in the second or third year because her egg laying ability goes down quite a bit if she does live that long. Just like if you have chickens, you notice that their egg laying drops off dramatically after the second, third, and fourth year. The same with the queens, but there are cases of commercial beekeepers having queens for 5 years, 6 years that have been marked. And what happens with those queens is they're usually in a breeder hive. That hive is not producing honey. It's not producing massive amounts of beads. They're just using it as a breeder because she's a great queen. She has great genetics, and she's just keeping that hive going. Maybe it's a small nuke or whatever, and she doesn't have to lay 2,000 eggs a day. And they'll just use her as a breeder. And there have been quite a few confirmed cases, if you look in the literature, of queens living 5 to 6 years. I have not had a queen live that long. Part of my problem is I did too many years of treatment-free beekeeping, and most of the hives died from mites and different things like that. I have had one that lasted 3 years, and she did die in the early in the third year. So that's kind of my history. The stinger on the queen has no barbs. I didn't talk about that in the workers. I forgot about it. I did talk about their stinger, but the stinger on the worker has barbs. So when it stings you, it pulls out of their abdomen and they die. The queen does not have barbs. So if she stings you, she can sting you multiple times like a wasp does. Queens do not sting humans. It's very rare. There are very few reported cases of a queen. Even if you squeeze her to death, she will not sting you. Her stinger is mainly used for stinging other virgin queens when she hatches. So what happens in the hive is maybe they make multiple queen cells, and the first one that hatches will be considered the strongest, and she will go around and kill all the other virgin queens that are still in their cells with her barbless stinger. And so she can sting many times and her stinger will not come out and she will not die. And we already said that she is the largest bee in the hive, up to 2 centimeters long. Interesting fact about the queens is when they first hatch, they are not that much bigger than the worker bees. They're actually a lot smaller than that picture that I have there because their ovaries have not quite developed yet and they haven't been fed the massive amount of royal jelly that like inflames them, or not inflames, not a good word, but it engorges them and gets them going. And you will see her like increase in size by 30 or 40% once she starts laying and she's been mated. So it's pretty interesting to see. When you have a virgin queen running around in your hive, they kind of hop. You can almost miss her. The thing that you have to look for is that big spot on their thorax. It's a little bit bigger and more defined than the worker bees. But as far as the length, when they first are born, they're very similar to worker bees. They have more of a V shape in their tail. When you get used to looking for them, you'll be able to figure it out. But it is a little bit different. All right, let's go through some more information about the queen. So after 16 days, she hatches out of the queen cell. And the first 2 days, basically, she is letting her wings harden. She can't fly yet. Her wings are very soft. It's very fragile. It's not a great time to try to mark the queen or hold her or do anything with her. Just let her run around in there. Her wings will harden, and she is spreading her pheromones around the hive so that the bees know that she's there. Now, she doesn't have as many as when she's mated, but she still does have some pheromones that are going on in there. So she's walking around the whole hive, wandering, they call it. So in the first 3 to 4 days, she will take an orientation flight. This is not her mating flight. She's just going around to see the area. Just like if you move to a new area, you're just checking it out. You want to see where the houses are, where the apartments are, maybe where the grocery store is. That's what she's doing. She's going out to see the lay of the land, find out maybe where the drones congregate, where the water is, whatever the bees do. We don't really know, but she does go out and do an orientation flight, but she does not usually mate then. She'll come back. She'll still be a virgin. And then within the first 5 to 7 days, she will go out on a mating flight. And the studies show that more than 50% of queens take only one mating flight. So she'll go out and she'll look for what they are calling this drone congregation area, which is what I talked about when I talked about the drones. Once they become fertile and able to fly, they go out and look for these drone congregation areas, which there's some specific things that they know about them. They know that they're very large in diameter, and they're usually open up to 120 meters. So it's a very large open space that doesn't have a lot of trees or anything, so that the bees can fly really quickly and high. And the queen tends to go out and find these, and then she literally starts to fly straight up in the air, and then she'll be intercepted by these drones. And like I said, the mating of the drone only takes 3 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds. So within 30 seconds to 45 seconds, she can mate with between 10 and 20 drones, which is the typical of a queen. She will mate with, I think the average is 10 or 12 in a mating flight, and then she comes back to the hive. And what the scientists are saying is somehow she knows how much sperm she has in her, and if the weather is nice, she wants to have like around 5 million. They've done a lot of studies, and they've estimated, and that's kind of the amount. I don't know if it's a volume or what, but that's kind of what she's looking for. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes the queens are not healthy. Maybe they weren't fed properly. They don't have the stamina to fly that many times. A lot of times it's the weather. So if you have queens that are trying to mate in bad weather, when it's rainy, when it's cold, they will not go out as many times. And if that 5 to 7 day window after they were born passes, sometimes they give up. So sometimes you'll have a virgin queen that's not been mated because of the weather. Maybe it rains. Let's say it rains 5 days in a row. She doesn't have the urge to go out anymore, and she thinks she's done whatever that programming is, and she starts laying eggs, and her eggs will be infertile. They'll only have half of the genetics, and they will basically be drones. And you'll have a virgin queen that does not have the proper stuff, and you'll have to get a different queen. That does happen. I don't really know why that is. Obviously, there's all kinds of things that could happen, but typically they mate with 3 to 20 drones, and once they start laying, they can lay up to 2,000 eggs per day. I have personally never seen a queen that lays that many. Um, Mine probably around 1,200 to 1,500, but in all, they always say that in the peak time they can lay up to 2,000 eggs per day. Um, to give you an idea of what 2,000 eggs per day is, 2,000 eggs is almost a full frame of brood on one side. There's a guy who did a video, Devin, I can't think of his last name, Devin Beekeeping, I think is his YouTube channel, and he counted the cells. He did a whole interesting video on how much room it takes for bees to have, and I think he came up with like 2,600, 2,850 cells per side of a large brood frame, deep brood frame, and so you got like 6,000. Hello, dudes up, 6,000 bees per frame. So it's gonna take her 3 days to lay that if she's laying at the maximum thing. So she can literally lay in a week's time, she can lay 4 or 5 frames full of eggs. So that is a cranking queen, and that's probably one that's going to swarm if she's laying that many eggs. So usually, like I said, 1,200 to 1,500 is what I have personally seen in my experience, but I'm sure that there are people out there that have these queens that are massive layers, and that's why they have successful hives. All right, do we have any questions about any of that I covered? I'm trying to think. I did talk about the mating, the queen mating, and all of that stuff, and the drone mating. I think I covered most of it as far as basic information, just so you know the steps of what happens. And there's some important things like you don't want to close your hive up when you're trying to get a queen mated, because that queen needs to come out and then come back. You don't want to do it when the weather's bad, but sometimes you don't have control over that. So hopefully, if you're trying to produce queens, you're doing it when the weather is good. So there's a lot of that information. That's why we want to know some of this biology of the bee, so that we can use it to make better decisions as far as bee husbandry and taking care of our bees. That's really the best. Like I said, I'm not a bee scientist. I don't need to know all the little details, but the more you know about them and how they act and how they react to different stimuli, it helps you become a better beekeeper. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. If you're on the replay and you're watching it, you can put your questions and comments in the stream, and I will respond to them. That helps other beekeepers. If you have any more information that you would like to share, if you're a bee scientist and you want to enlighten us with a little more information, that would be fantastic. And if that is it and we don't have any questions, I'd just like to thank you for watching live stream number 9. And like and subscribe. Please press the like button if you got some value out of this. That really helps me know that I'm on the right track for the information that you want to know. Leave a comment. Tell me what you wanted to see, whether you liked it, whether you didn't like it. It helps me kind of fine-tune my training for the next time. And like I said, click on the bell notification so that you'd be notified when I put up stuff. I am putting stuff up in the community tab now, some pictures and some other things that don't really need a whole video, but sometimes there may be a clarification of something that I did in another video. And also, this is the ninth stream, so there's 8 other streams with lots of great information. If you have not watched them, if this is your first time, check them out. I think you'll learn some stuff. Thank you, Leslie. That's fantastic to hear. And enjoy your Sunday and wherever you are in the world. And as usual, be extraordinary. And we'll talk soon. Thank you.